Okay, it's Andy here again with another video going through some of my records, and this is the second in the sort of occasional series I started a few weeks ago, which I've called the Millennium years, where basically I'm going through a 10-year period which represents some great music, but it was also pretty pivotal in my own life. So sort of going through records for each year that I have, 5 to 10 records depending how many I've got for that year. And also just putting it in slightly in the context of what was going on in my life at the time, because it was all a period of change. So we started in '94 and I'm going to take it through to 2003, so you know, up to 20 years ago. And this is number 2, so I'm going through 1995 here, and there's some good records. I personally, having gone through all of this, don't think it's quite as good a year as '94, but there's still some great records. I don't have debuts for this, so a lot of the stuff in '94 was debuts. So this is more of a continuation and bands improving as they go. So I've got 10, but I'm only really counting 8 of them. 7. Where are we? Actually 7 of them. So I've got 9. And 2 are honourable mentions, so I'm going to do an honourable mention. Oh, I ought to say, of course, this was the 90s, so at the time, all these things I bought on CD. Some of them, 3 of them specifically, I've rebought on vinyl as reissues, so I'm going to go through a bit of vinyl, but most of these are on CD, I'm afraid, because that was the period. So an honourable mention for the Smashing Pumpkins, what's it called, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, a massive album, sort of over 2 CDs. It's an honourable mention because this is actually one of my wife's Marion's, and I don't really know it. I have heard it, but I can't really talk about it. I can't say it's an important album for me, but sort of having gone through this, I pulled this out and thought, I really ought to get to know this album better, so I'm going to do that. The second honourable mention I'm not going to include in a major way because it's a remix, and this is basically, in fact I mentioned it last time when I I talked a little bit about Massive Attack's Protection, and this is which is a bit of a bitty album, and this is a remix by the Mad Professor. I think it was a DJ, called No Protection, so it's a sort of remix with their permission. In some ways it's better, having listened to it again back to back with the other. I think they're both good versions of each other, if you like, so not quite enough to go for it. So we're running on the rundown now. So my number 7 for this year is Blur's, let me put it up there, The Great Escape. So last time we did Part Life, so this is the album which came after Part Life. It's all in the midst of all that Britpop crap which was going on at the time. It's not an all filler. All filler? It's not an all killer album, this one, but it's got some great tracks on it, including possibly my favourite Blur track. So I mean, you've got the sort of Country House, which was the single at the time, Charmless Man, which is a great track, but my favourite is the Universal, which I think is an absolutely fabulous track. So that's Blur's A Great Escape, decent album, not one of their best. Another fabulous album from an old, as I say, there are no debuts here, so these are sort of like some old stages going on, and this is Paul Weller's Stanley Road. So he had a bit of a purple patch in the mid 90s, and this was one of them. And I remember at the time I was doing a lot of driving around, and this was a particular album which I listened to a lot in the car while I was towering around. And I mean, Stanley Road supposedly is the name of the road where he grew up in a town in Surrey, not that far from where I live, called Woking, and it's got some great tracks on there, the title track, Stanley Man, The Changing Man, the colour, a good cover of I Walk on Gilded Splinters. Just an all-round good, decent album. So now we come to the first of my vinyl ones, reissue. This was an album which I wasn't completely into at the time. Well, it was a band I wasn't. It was a band I discovered a little bit later in the early 00s, to be honest. And I've gone back and listened to these, and it's Porcupine Trees. The Sky Moves Sideways. Yeah, The Sky Moves Sideways. It's a double. I think in this period, this is when Porcupine Tree was really a Steve Wilson solo project. So, you know, it wasn't fully a band at that stage. It was more sort of using you know, other band members, but not, they weren't necessarily permanent. And I think I quite like this. It's a bit psych. It's not typical. It's not really in the sort of heavy end of Porcupine Tree, which was maybe a sort of a little bit later. Nor is it massively proggy, but it is quite psych, and it's a nice musical album. So let me, and it's a double, as I say, it's a reissue, and the label's got the artwork on it. So where are we next? Number 4. Before I go on, let me just put I said I would sort of set the context of what was going on in my life, and I think I mentioned last time for '94 that I'd just been promoted to a role of national sales and marketing manager, and I'd moved back to Birmingham. So I was living in Sutton Coldfield at the time, not far from Sutton Park. Really enjoyed that place, if you like. It was a nice place to live. At the time, I mean, it was there was a lot going on trying to learn this role. I was really getting into the marketing side of things. What I worked in was not sort of consumer goods, so it wasn't that sort of marketing you think of. It was much more around strategy and so on, and I was really enjoying that. I was also really getting into some of the IT development. You know, not doing the, well, actually I did do a bit of development, but you know, I was really getting into sort of management information, data, and defining MI. So I was less interested in the sales side of things, which, you know, considering that was the main part of the role, wasn't necessarily a good thing. I wasn't getting on with my wife, and that had been going on for some time. My kids were growing up, so my daughter then would have been, we were 94, so she would have been 12, I think. No, what am I saying? She would have been 8 at the time. 8, going on 12, going on 4, if you know what I mean. And my son was born in 1990, so he would have been 5 at the time. So there you go. Lots going on, and listening to a lot of this music, particularly in the car as I was driving round. So my number 4 for 1995 is Pulp's Different Class. This is a great album. It's just, I mean, it stood the test of time. You hear these songs now, and they're played a lot on the radio. You know, Misshapes, Fabulous Common People, I Spy, Disco 2000. It's great stuff. So what's next? I'm going to pick up another vinyl copy, and this time it is Oasis. What's the Story, Morning Glory. I know, you know, Oasis tend to divide opinion, but at their best, and I think this was their best, they were very good. And this album is, in my opinion, is an all killer. You know, where we've got some of these classic ones: Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger, some might say Cast No Show, She's Electric, Morning Glory, Champagne Supernova. On vinyl it's a double. Obviously it was a reissue, and there are the Battling Brothers, and I, you know, to this day, again, it stood the test of time. When you listen to an album which is getting on for 30 years old and it's still good, then it's good. So leads me to my number 2, and we come to a live album, and I'm talking about Pink Floyd, Pink Floyd's Pulse. So this was recorded on their tour post the release of Division Bell the previous year, and they toured that and released this in '95. I would love to have seen them, but I didn't. I did actually know somebody who went to it, and there was I think it was a London gig where they're part of the seating collapse and people were injured and stuff like that. And I did know somebody who went to that concert, wasn't involved in, thankfully sitting in that area. But it's got a lot of the old stuff. It's got, you know, it's obviously got the Division Bell stuff. It's a real sort of best of, and again, it's an album which you know, I listen to today. It keeps coming round. It's just a superb live album, and you know, having got their just recently their release of the '74 concert of Dark Side of the Moon, it just reminds you how good a live band they were, and this doesn't miss waters in my humble opinion. So that's my number 2. So number 1, back to a piece of vinyl, and I'm talking Radiohead's The Bends. And you know, again, I come back to this so much. It's such a great album. It's I can just listen to it endlessly. In some ways, it's my favourite of their albums. Or put it this way, not necessarily my favourite, but the album that I'm fondest of. Again, it's another all killer, which builds up and ends in the amazing Street Spirit. So there you go, that's my 95. As I say, this is an occasional series, so every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks I'll sort of put one together. I've next time obviously it's going to be 96, another big change year for me. I don't know what albums I've got, I've not researched it yet, so I will be doing my Wikipedia sort of search of albums from 96 and then working out which ones I've got. I'm bound to have some. It's I can't think, you know, off the top of my head whether it's a great year or a good year, but it's going to be one of those. So anyway, that's the second of this occasional series. It's 95, and as I say, I got 7 great albums, plus a couple honourable mentions that I perhaps need to listen to a bit more. So thanks for watching.